Look around a city and you'll see a multitude of stories waiting to be told, but you might not realize just how complex and layered the explanation is. Join our motley cast of urban dwellers and planners as we research, question, and sometimes fall deep down a rabbit hole. I'm Ellen.
I'm Matt.
I'm Tess. And I'm Zach.
And this is Multi-Story. Hello, friends. Welcome to an episode of Multi-Story. We today are going to tackle a few Atlantic articles that we have shared amongst us that relate to loneliness and cities and how they are built and how they are changing, really, with the introduction of various policy changes, but also technology and also ways of doing business. So the three articles that we shared amongst ourselves are all from the Atlantic. The first one is The Antisocial Century, which is what kicked off this entire thought bubble among the four of us, which is basically implying that as cities change because of the technology introduced with the smartphone, that we're now behaving very differently, and it is prompting the public to feel lonelier, for us to be more disconnected, for us to be withdrawing from certain aspects of our social society. In counter to that, Zach submitted the myth of a loneliness epidemic, basically saying this data is heckin' flawed. Look again and stop being so dramatic. Heckin'. We're from the Midwest, at least I am. And then I submitted as the solution an article titled Americans Need to Party More. And I do feel like these three particular articles are relatively good representations of three of our personalities, which is where Tess says, check out this data, let's do a deep dive. And Zach says, and then I said, what about party? What do you all think?
And I observed.
Matt came up with quips. It was great. Our group chat is on fire. So I don't know if you all agreed with my summary or not. How do you feel I did?
Well, I wouldn't say that I totally agree with the article that I sent that said that, this is all just a panic. Um, I'm pretty convinced by the evidence that there is a loneliness epidemic. And when you have the Surgeon General out there warning that there is a loneliness epidemic, I don't think the Surgeon General sends out those types of warnings without some good data behind it. So I actually found the data in the article more compelling than the rebuttal.
Interesting.
I felt like the rebuttal was kind of a style critique. It was nitpicking the data, but not the bigger idea. And it was kind of like maybe we're using the wrong word for a real problem that we have. And it was mostly, I think, if we're focused on the idea that if we're going to have like a public health intervention, we got to make sure we aim it right. But I don't think it really did a job of refuting the bigger idea, which to me seems intuitively true, that we're lonelier than we. But this is the problem that often happens is I feel things that are intuitively true, and then Tess often says, but are they? And then we go down a rabbit hole. So let's go.
Yeah. Even in the article, there was sort of the original article that was talking about this growing loneliness in society. There was also an acknowledgement that people weren't necessarily saying that they felt lonely. There was a discussion about how people had a desire to spend more time at home, or to not go out to the movies, or to not host friends at their house, that they chose to interact with people through their phones and other sorts of new communication technology. And sort of the pitch that the article makes is that they say that they want that, but they don't really want that. And if they were just more social, they would be happier, right? And there's also data that it points out talking about that. And I think it's an important issue, like for society and for how we live in the world. But I was particularly interested in it because of how it connects to cities. Because there was one particular part of that initial article where they said not all sorts of social interaction are the same, and not all are being affected the same by the changing world we live in, the changing technologies we have, right? Like, they're like, in one sense, your close family bonds, you might be connecting in social more than ever before because, 30 years ago, maybe you didn't have the capacity to like text your family or significant others like multiple times an hour all day long, right? You went off to work, you didn't see each other, and then you came back and saw each other when you were at home again, right? So in some sense, like these close family bonds are stronger. And in other sense, these connections to far-flung groups are also stronger, right? People connecting with people who share their interests or views all around the world. And you're connected to people who you would have never come into contact with through these tools. But what they highlighted is sort of the bonds that were weaker were those like middle area of social connections. And they said things like local friend groups or like neighborhood or social organizations or things like that. And in one of our previous discussions, Matt, we had talked about how the situation where someone is um, it used to be that the bonds between neighbors and friends were stronger than whatever you thought about what was going on in the world. And that seems to have flipped a little bit. And maybe the reason it's flipped is because that type of social connection is weaker than it used to be because we're not having those sorts of connections with our neighbors or neighborhoods. And that's what got me thinking about this in relation to cities.
That was kind of one of the points that the article brought up was the relationships that are weakening are the ones that in the middle that you referenced, Tess, are the ones where you are least likely to agree with the person's outlook on life. Is that in a very natural way, right? Without putting yourself truly on like in a combative spot in a way that's like you like your neighbor already, you like your kids' teachers, you like the people who you run into in these very casual ways. I think Matt, you've referenced, like the coffee shops and the baristas and the bartenders. But, those little interactions are what then you realize like we don't see eye to eye and I have to get along with you because you're part of my social fabric. So losing that gentle um argumentative bit, I don't want to say argumentative, that's not fair, but just kind of like that the gentle friction is what's um adding to the polarization of a lot of stuff. To your point, like we can connect with people who we have a lot in common with, which is sometimes a nice way of saying we agree on things, which has then removed this idea that people might disagree and that's okay. It's like you can just reinforce, I mean, social media is rife with this, reinforce your worldview because you might be the only one who thinks this in your small circle, but the internet is the biggest circle and you can find more of your niche
Well, I
people.
don't need to know what my barista thinks about politics, right? It's
Yeah.
just like a human interaction that's not predicated on that. And I guess I have kind of two thoughts. One is we could debate, and it's probably a totally separate show or separate podcast about whether the quality of the interaction that you mentioned, Tess, that you're in touch with your family via group text or whatever, is that the same? Is it equivalent? Is it different in a way but that's still meaningful? And then the other side is like, I wonder if this idea that like people say self-reportedly that they want to spend more time alone, but is this just a result of atrophy? Because that is how we interact with each other. Like socializing is a habit. It's a healthy habit. It's something that's good for you. It's essential to like human flourishing, but we lose it and we are not good at it. And then it's exhausting and then we don't do it and it perpetuates itself. And so these ways that it happens automatically because I want to get a coffee because I need my morning caffeine um, builds that skill in small ways, like, little reps that automatically get done. Because it's easier to stay home and watch TV, but you're killing yourself slowly.
Yeah.
In
And socially.
some of the data that was in this article, I want to share some just amazing stats that were amazing to me anyway. The article mentioned Robert Putnam, which is he's a sociologist who wrote Bowling Alone, very famous book that was released, I think, in the late 90s. That kind of
It's set, I think it was 1999.
I got to
1999.
go see if I have my copy. I don't know if it's ever here.
I know
I
that
do
was
have it lying around. I couldn't find it for this podcast, but he measured, and a lot of this data comes from time use surveys. And it was defined as being alone in a room, even if you're interacting with somebody over a computer or a text. And that type of togetherness dropped 45% from the 70s to the 90s, the 20 years that Robert Putnam was looking at. And then since that book came out, it's dropped another 32%. And we can get into the reasons why, but a big one is television, which Matt just mentioned. And like, I found it amazing that the average American watches 19 hours of TV a week, 7 hours of TV for every 1 hour of being with another person. And in 1999, 77% of sixth graders had a TV in their room. I think that
And
was in
Sixth
seventh
graders.
grade.
the 23% of us who did not have a TV are hyper aware of that fact. Can I just point out? But yeah, 77% of sixth graders had a TV in their own room.
In their bedroom. Yeah, by 1999, and I'm sure that's only gotten worse. So anyway, those are some stats that kind of frame the magnitude of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and you know, whether it's being able to see the news on TV or being able to text someone on your phone, right? Like part of this is communication technology making it easier to do things without that social interaction. But I think what Matt is talking about is the other side of that, where the tasks that are necessary for life sort of used to push people into social interactions like by necessity. Like you will talk to the cashier because you have to go to the store and buy food. You will talk to the barista because, you need your morning coffee. And those are opportunities for social interaction and connection with your neighbors who aren't necessarily your close family that you had to do before. And maybe it's less obligatory now and it's sort of coming from both ends. It's easier to do things at home and there's fewer necessities pushing people to socially interact in the world.
And what we know
Yeah.
from this research now is that this kind of interaction is essential for your mental and physical health in ways that I don't think we fully understood before. So the fact that it's sort of built into life, I mean, we as urbanists, if we can use that term, like we kind of know the idea of virtuous built-in wellness, right? That the fact that walkable communities have people walk and then they're healthier because they walk, right? Like this is just another way. And I'm coming from a biased perspective, right? Where I'm like, this is the loneliest epidemic that cities can fix because cities are the panacea for me. Uh, but it to me reinforces another way that like the way our cities and neighborhoods are designed is both the problem and solution.
Well, and it's hit on a bit in the article about the lack of third places now. Which is third places is a very urbanist term of it's a place you can go that is not your work and it's not your home that you feel comfortable in at the very base level. And the thing that I've noted too across the last several decades or more is there are not very many places that are third spaces where you don't have the expectation of to buy something in order to use it, like libraries being one of the only places, schools, community centers maybe being like just the few that I can think of off the top of my head. A lot of the third places that you see otherwise would be a coffee shop where if you show up and plop yourself down without buying a coffee, you might be asked to leave. And then same for the pub and same for, a great bookstore or something along those lines. So how does that all affect this too?
Yeah, I think, and Matt, this is something you and I have debated about for years, right? I think what's interesting to me is how strongly people seem to attach desired social interactions to economic transactions, right? So, like, I work fully remote, and so do a lot of other people, and there's more people doing that than ever. Um, And that's something that's changing cities, right? We have big empty office buildings and business districts. We have a shortage of the right types of housing in the right places where people want to live. And because people can work remote, where they want to live is not necessarily driven by where they work anymore. Um, and so if we think about like why cities are where they are, maybe they're there because of a geographic proximity to a river or a railroad or a highway, or, that could move people and goods around, or maybe it was proximity to like a labor pool to produce the goods and services, or proximity to power, like a wind or water mill. Um, but right now, for me, like my livelihood is detached from my geography. And so that means like the place where I live is not driven by where I can find a job or how close I am to like a particular river or railroad. And so um, for me, what makes a competitive city looks different than the way cities used to work. And I think this idea that the drivers for what brings us together are changing. And so the way cities work also change. This is what I think about when I think about the loneliness epidemic. So cities still do what they do. They're like a melting pot of all these connections and interactions. It sort of amplifies exponentially with each additional person, that comes together. Um, but like in the same way we don't respond to sprawl by like lamenting the loss of like a medieval city wall, like I don't know that we can respond to changing communication technologies or changing ways that our economy works, like people are using the drive-through instead of walking into the coffee shop. Um, I don't know that we can just say, well, we would have more social interaction if everyone just, walked down to the market again, right? Like, I think it's incumbent upon us to like think forward a little bit about what is driving cities today and how does that change how we think about social spaces?
This is what I want, like, this is what was bugging me about the first article is this like, they were like looking for these blanket statement things of what caused this loneliness epidemic. And it's easy to like say that it was the TV and now it's the way that cell phones are changing everything. And in my brain, it's just like, that's fine. Like, it's gonna change again. And so they're like, it's gonna prompt everybody to have this loneliness epidemic again and again and again. But we have to, like, I guess the solution to me is going to be the cell phones aren't going away. How do we instead create the next bit of connection in the way that like incorporates all of these new changes? I really liked, Tess, how you were like, we didn't blame urban sprawl on getting the medieval wall, like knocking down the medieval wall. Like that's exactly, it's like we had to sprawl. You couldn't build up, you had to build out. Okay, that's another episode. But then at this point, by
I
the
feel
way,
like we're going to give Matt an aneurysm.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
you're
fine. That's
making my
half the
point.
point
Keep
of
going, Ellen.
it's half the point of why we started this podcast, right? And also, we have now said that's another podcast twice. So at the end, if anybody listening at home is following along, take a shot, I guess, of whatever you're drinking. But like that was, I think, my frustration with the first article is that it's just lamenting all of these things that have changed without the acknowledgement of the fact that change is gonna be constant and we have to adapt.
Yeah, I think there are a million different things that are combining together to lead to this loneliness epidemic. And I think it's important to identify what those are, um, and not necessarily say, oh, let's go backwards and like undo these things that we've done. We're not getting rid of smartphones in the near future. But there's technology forces that we've talked about. There's city design forces that we've talked about, the audio-oriented development, the lack of neighborhood parks, et cetera. There's the economic issues that we have touched on a little bit, but the widening income gap, people have to work more. They have shifts that aren't predictable and reliable. And so it's hard to be involved in a social institution like a church or a club or whatever it is if you can't predict when your shift is going to be. And you have to spend more time working, so you don't have enough energy to do that anyway. Um, we've talked about how it affects yourself, and then how that all spirals up to the society level where we have our political discourse that we've talked about, where people are screaming at each other in community in public meetings. And I think all of these things are related. And so, how do we go forward? It's not getting rid of technology, but maybe it's using technology more thoughtfully, or designing our cities more thoughtfully.
Well, and to build on Tessa's point and all of those impacts to the way we interact, like if cities are no longer places of business, if cities are no longer required for us to meet our daily needs, then what are they for? And like if we love cities, like are we entering a post city relevance era because everything is distributed and where you live really doesn't matter? And if you don't need your neighborhood to meet your daily needs, which I would argue is, though I don't want to like top down policy intervention, but like, yes, I think we should like make intentional design so people do go to the market because it's very good for them and good for society and good for communities. But also like if people aren't doing that, then what are cities for? I mean, like, why
Yeah.
would we not just live in private spaces if we're going to spend most of our time there anyway?
So I don't think cities have lost their role like in the social function of our lives, right? Like cities have a social value in my mind that is not diminished any way by communication technology and these other things. What gets at me is this idea like that the only way we can achieve these social interactions is through this crutch of economic transactions. And like in the same way that where we work is not tied to geography or these other things that are sort of different now than they used to be, I think, we can um, like maybe we should dare to think about what a city could or should look like if the social life is less tethered to the services, right? So like maybe the problem isn't that we have like a app delivery kitchen instead of some other restaurant. The problem is that we're depending on a bar or restaurant for our social needs, and like the only way that those needs were getting met is through this commercial transaction. So like um, maybe the actual problem is that we're not investing time or money or space intentionally in the social life of our cities. And so, if our social lives are feeling fragile and if we're feeling lonely, maybe it's because we have tied them to the hip of these commercial transactions, and those transactions are less relevant in a world today where the economy works differently.
So a bit of like if we inadvertently decoupled the social from the commercial by having the new technology. Like COVID prompted so much more delivery and so much more like stuff that you can prep for on your phone and not have to just like go out and run an errand. So we've it unintentionally decoupled those two things, and you're basically proposing that we have to now couple that social interaction to something. And what does that look like if it doesn't have to be tied to an errand of commerce?
Right. Like we can like think about in an era of online shopping, the retail spaces that are like competitive today are the ones that create experiences. So they're giving people a reason to want to go to a place and be in a place and spend time in a place. And someone's spending is kind of untethered from place. They can order whatever they want online and have it delivered. So what brings them somewhere? What has that gravity to bring us together where we can achieve those social interactions, those benefits? It's the strength of that social experience that that place can provide, right? Like, so it's like, oh my God, I'm not talking to the barista anymore because there's food delivery apps. It's like, okay, let's create some public spaces and some public processes and some public institutions that nurture our social lives. But I don't know that it has to be tethered to our economic activity, right? I'm speaking as like a raging introvert. And so I know that the things I'm going to say are just going to push a lot of people's buttons. But like when I go to the grocery store, I'm physically present in the store, but I'm not interacting with the other customers or the cashiers. I want to get in and out as soon as possible. But My partner has conversed with the delivery app driver, and they've commiserated about the weirdness of the local Aldi store where the food is delivered from, right? Like that was a social interaction that she had related to her grocery shopping that was different than what would have happened if she went to the store. Now, I'm not suggesting that like food delivery apps are like a way to make friends, but I'm saying that like um, we can choose to be intentional about creating social experiences, and they
Yeah.
don't have to be tied to spending money.
I don't
Yeah.
think I fundamentally disagree, but I think there's a pragmatism gap. Like what I'm hearing is basically like it would be better if we overthrew capitalism as the foundational structure of our society, which fair. But
Isn't
I
that
think
like
the other thing is like,
thing number two that we're supposed to listen for in this podcast is how many times do we table a topic and how many times do we try to overthrow capitalism?
yeah, I mean, you know, that's the sister show maybe.
Okay.
Um,
Sorry to interrupt. What were you going to say?
But no, that's quite all right. But my other thought is, if these transactions are happening anyway, is it not more virtuous? And the fact that some of these transactions are necessary to live, like you need supplies, and that they're not all elective, right? The coffee might be elective. I would argue it's necessary. But
Mhm.
if these are happening, why would it not be better for them to happen in a mixed world of random collisions and chance social interactions and serendipity and discovery and all the things that we love about cities? Like we're doing it anyway. And the fact that people are electing as much as they can to opt out of social interaction means that if we have some things that still require it, maybe that's like essential for our survival as a human species.
I think it's
I
part of
mean,
the
if
evolution of how we're like working together with tech though, right? Because like being able to order groceries online for me is even just like when my kid was a newborn, right? Like there are certain moments when I wouldn't have had groceries if it had not been for Instacart because of like my life at that moment. And so kind of acknowledging that that's going to be part of some people's everyday is that like accessibility issues or just convenience. Like maybe you work from 7 to 7, I don't know.
And I want
But
to acknowledge that I'm like, I don't have children. I'm privileged in the way that I don't have health concerns that prevent me from going outside. But also like 20 years ago, you could have just like texted me as like, hey, Matt, would you mind picking up some groceries for me? I
I
would
think
have
that
seen
might
you.
be more of like the root of it. And I think what Tess is kind of hinting at, and what I agree with too, is there is like an intentional aspect of this that people want to shrug off as not my problem. But part of the loneliness, the salve for the loneliness epidemic would be to be intentionally welcoming, like intentionally creating other pieces where you do interact with people. And so I guess Matt, my argument against what you were saying is like we kind of you're basically saying like we're trying to reinvent the wheel. The interaction was already there and it's taken away and we're acting like we have to now like sub in something new. Like your argument, God, stupid hand raise thing on Zoom. Your argument is like, why wouldn't we put it back? Like we had a solution. Why would like we're overthinking this? And
Yeah,
Tess
I
and I are
mean, why wouldn't we? If you need a job anyway, why don't you just sleep on the factory floor and then you'll be with your friends all the time, right? Like,
Yeah, related to the pragmatism, I read that second article and it stated that there was a similar panic in the 20s where everybody was worried about radios and the
yeah.
lung epidemic. And then I went back and read the first article, and it had this paragraph that I just thought was wonderful. And it talked about in the early 20th century, so before the 20s or around the 20s, when there was this earlier epidemic of loneliness, there was a group of liberal Christians who had this social gospel movement where they were passing major political reforms like getting rid of child labor. And in addition to that, they were encouraging a more communitarian approach to American life. And that manifested in secular union halls and community centers and the libraries and parks and everything that we see today. And we've kind of gone away from that. And what I really love about this article, it says, I'm just going to read one sentence out of here. It says, no one can precisely say how to change a nation's moral, emotional atmosphere. But what's certain is that atmospheres do change. Our smallest actions create norms. Our norms create values. And then our values drive behavior, and our behaviors cascade. And I was thinking about Pastor Bud, who gave the blessing at Trump's inauguration in the ceremony that they had around there, and how that kind of kicked off a interest in liberal uh, Christian groups. And so maybe we'll see history repeat itself.
I remember that passage too, and that's what I was getting at with this like intentional aspect. They looked around and said, "We see something is shifting, so we must now shift too to create whatever is next. What's the iteration that is coming after this?" So I'm with it. I like that. I liked that passage too.
The quote I saw from the second article, um, talking about worries about loneliness, and they said the warnings sometimes have merit, but they also align with a popular kind of folk wisdom that once upon a time there was a lot of tight-knit community and everybody was happy and social relations were quote unquote authentic. And I think that did resonate with me, this idea that I think maybe it's just human that the first instinct to change is often that things are worse.
In my
But
day,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, um, but like it just when new things happen, you need new approaches and new tools and new ideas, right? And I think if we get stuck on lamenting how things were before the communication environment, the technology environment is the way it is, then we're never going to get to that new, healthier paradigm because we're going to always be sort of tilting at windmills to try and get off your phones and walk down to the store, right? Like we've got to find a forward-looking way to be intentional about social interaction and social spaces that is compatible with and congruent with the way people use technology and communicate today.
so could I throw a wrench in this potentially, or a twist? Is not this new sort of distributed commerce approach to dealing with our needs, our commercial needs, inherently car dependent and like car intensive? Like these delivery, I could get into
Like the full
examples.
like true. If you looked at the logistics of getting that thing from the website order to now to your house, it's dependent on cars. It just isn't your car.
Particularly, yes, exactly. Like I think the tweet from back when that was a place where you didn't loathe to go, that Tess and I had like 5 years ago, was my response to someone saying like, if you live your life car free, but you're just ordering stuff on Amazon all day, you're not really living your life car free. Uh, there's a ghost kitchen 3 blocks from my house that drives things to my building for them to sit in our lobby and get cold, which I don't know why people would want to do that as opposed to go to one of the wonderful establishments nearby. But that's a, personality difference. But is not this whole thing sort of, from a city perspective, potentially really damaging because it makes place matter less, A, but B, the more distributed and it's scaled it gets, that these mega warehouse type things and ghost kitchens, like uh, we're just driving everything around.
I
You're
mean, I
not
think the
wrong.
short answer is I don't think it has to be, right? Like, um, my mail's delivered by bike. The food at the store comes from nearby, right? Like, it's not an inevitable law of nature that if you have, um, you know, that it has to work the way it does in the middle of the United States.
But isn't it that
Um,
only true in where you live because most people still walk to that store? Would it still be true if most people just got deliveries? Why would they be there in the more dense place that's harder
right.
logistically to operate out
Well,
of?
there are more people walking and there are more people going to the market. And there's more interactions with people around. Although I will say, talking to strangers is not culturally normal here in the way that maybe it is in the United States.
You don't
So I think
say
that's another
hi to
angle
everyone you
too,
see on
is
the
right.
sidewalk.
This is a very like American-centric conversation about how friendly we are with strangers, right? The idea that you strike up a conversation with someone in the grocery store is rude in the extreme where I live, right? So I think that's a whole nother um, dynamic. But like
Oh, I thought you were going to say
the
podcast.
reason people are going out in those places is because they are intentionally designed social spaces, right? They're not, so part of it is logistics, right? A city can be designed in a way where it doesn't have to be, you don't have to drive a long distance to get to the things you need, right? There are more efficient ways to plan our cities. I don't think that says anything about how our communication technology interacts with our economic transactions, right? And there are more people walking around, but I don't think they're not doing that because they're like, boy, this is a super efficient way for me to exchange good for services. They're like, it's really nice to be here and I want to see people, right? Like that is the driver. And I think that's what I keep harping on is like, that is what can be disconnected from a separate logic, which is the logic of the distribution of goods and services and the organization of the economy.
And I think too, what I heard you say that makes sense to me is that the reason that you want to get out in your city could just be that it's designed well. It is designed for people. It is designed for the micro transit or like being able to get out and get around, and it is pleasant. And that doesn't so therefore it's like, yeah, it is nice to walk to the grocery store if you can, but only if it's a nice walk to the grocery store. Like there's plenty of examples in American design where this grocery store is only, half a mile, quarter mile, but you have to cross the freeway to get there. So it's not going to be nice. And like what you were
And
saying
it'll
is
never get nice if we just turn to delivery to solve that problem, I guess.
true, but you can also build intentionally in the point. It's like I could have my groceries delivered, in a, some magical, efficient way. And there would be a way to design the city that I still want to be out in it instead of making my home like what it said in the article. It's like people are making their homes cozier because we're spending more time in them versus going out into the world for that kind of relaxation time.
And my argument would be that you're going to spend a lot less time out in it if you're not going to get some bread for dinner tonight, if you're just doing it recreationally. I mean, this is kind of the other weird direction of cities is that they're just kind of playgrounds that people come in and out of for, hanging out. And
But
they
I think
feel
that's Tessa's challenge, isn't it? Is to say, like, what could you think of to do that isn't tied to that commercial aspect, that isn't tied to that exchange or to that necessity? Like, I think that's part of what is being enabled when we're thinking of like a tech forward future where, what I want AI to do for me is like anticipate my grocery order, like just look at my refrigerator and tell me what I need so that I don't have to go do it and I just go pick up blah blah blah. It's like if we really want to imagine this like truly tech efficient future, it has now freed us up to be recreational. So what does a city look like?
it's a
It's
place
like
where everyone's
we've
inside watching 8 hours of TV.
well, we sort of lost the stick to get out and interact, but we haven't yet created the carrot. And so I think what I'm saying is we should make a carrot instead of trying to find the stick again.
Yeah.
And I think
That's what
these
I
are
took it
not
as.
fundamentally incompatible ideas. Like we could be less focused on commerce, and I think we should be. But also, I still want to go out and buy my bread and like have a park to sit in that doesn't require me to buy anything. I think both can be true.
Agreed. And I do think there's probably not even probably, I think there's room to slide back into the point where we are going to restaurants, we're not ordering all the time. And this is all, I think we've been speaking in hyperbole to a certain extent, but that is where, yeah, we did have a lot of progress, if you will, in like the delivery aspects and how much you do or don't just go out into the world. I think you can just add some of that back in. And that is part of what the cities that we like to visit have just built in, is that it's all, it was built in a different era, or it was built purposefully, or it's been redesigned in a way that is more person centric to where you want to be in it, and it is inviting, and it is part of the experience is being in the city.
Yeah, could you imagine if we designed cities like to your point, Ellen, we love cities that are pre-car because they're human scaled. Could you
Yep.
imagine if cities were being designed from scratch today for a delivery app-based distributed
All
remote work
apartment
economy?
buildings have a drive-through window. It's ironic. You have to be the one in the window, and the driver comes by you.
There's actually no door. There's just a drone hole on the top where all the goods fall in.
Right. I think it's a good point. Like, yeah, maybe your point is it's like if we're thinking of the future, but right now the future looks like delivery of all the things, we have to be careful not to design in a way that suddenly we've over-indexed on that convenience or on that trend, if you will. This was one of the things that also I thought of with this data, just to like start poking a hole in the data, is it's like all of this is only from the last 3 or 4 years. I don't know that I'm ready to call any of this a trend yet. It feels very anomaly in the data set. And we're all trying to like, and the loneliness epidemic is like, it's a panic off of these last 3 years. Like, these are pretty strange years, everybody. Can we maybe just simmer down? Like, I'll talk to you about this in 2030, but not in 2025. Obviously, I'm still running my mouth about it, so that's not true. But
Well, your third article was that we need to have a party, right? So
yeah, it's kind of, I felt like it was a bit of like first of all, it was, I think, an eighth the length of the first article that we sent out, which is my kind of article, the one that's shorter. And yeah, it says basically the one of the solutions to this loneliness epidemic is to start hosting your own parties. And I also love that in that article they did like a callback to the chain letter of like, you send this to two people and then they're going to send it back to you. And that means you get 27,000, letters or stamps or whatever it was supposed to be. But there is just the idea that, and this is, I think, what I was trying to get to with the intentional piece of this is part of the solution is, okay, we've acknowledged the problem, and now the solution is do something about it. And one of the things you can do about it is create the space to have these interactions. So in the party article, Americans Need to Party More, it's basically saying just do something, do like commit to doing two doesn't have to be like a party, but like two social gatherings per year. Like go to a park, tell everybody to bring picnic food, bring everybody together. I think it did say that it had to be like 10 or more people or else it doesn't count. And then if all 10 of those invitees host their own party, there's just like a fun way of you're going to be socially interacting with people more and more. So it was interesting. And Zach, I don't know if you can relate to this. I was talking to a friend over the weekend and we're basically lamenting this. Like it's hard for us to get our circle of adults together spontaneously because at this point we all have kids. And I just like in this offhanded comment, I was like, yeah, we weren't lonely when we didn't have kids. And she just about cried because it just felt very true. It's like suddenly you're like unit centric, right? You're family unit centric because that's just what happens, at least, around here.
Yeah, especially those intense years, the early years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to mention, getting people together. Uh, I met a friend at a park recently, and Tess, you shared this TikTok comment, and it wasn't on TikTok. It was about TikTok when it went down for like a day, and it was like, "What am I supposed to do? How do I make friends? Do I go to a place and like talk to people? Nobody does that." It's like, yes, it's exactly what you do. So I went to the park near my house, and there was another dad there, and I was like, "Hey, we both have small humans here. Let's be friends." And so now we are, and we noticed that there was a grill at the park that nobody ever seemed to use. And so he was like, you know what? I'm just going to start showing up on Thursday with charcoal, and anybody can bring whatever they want and they can grill. And so now there's a group of probably 10 or more people that when it's nice out on Thursday, people are there.
I love this. Zach, you fixed it. You fixed cities and society. You did it.
That's a wrap.
As long as you didn't DoorDash the charcoal, I'm in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing I worry about is like it's definitely true that door dashing everything reduces the amount of social interactions that we're all having as a society-wide basis. And like we're taking that away. And like Tessa's point, yes, we can replace that with non-commercial. And my personal anecdote is like doing that, but I don't know, I'm worried that it's not going to happen for everybody in society.
The choices that you make on an individual level go really far in cultivating the connections that you want. So, like, and that is where, Zach, what I love about your story is that, like, someone just said, I'm going to be here, I'm going to create this community, and then you did it. And I think it's hard in a society where we all, if you're paying attention, you are overwhelmed by news. And if you are working 40 hours a week, it might be remote or it might be not, like you are exhausted in other ways. And if you then, like to Tessa's point, you're an introvert, like it suddenly starts to feel very hard to also be creating these experiences that are going to bring that's going to bring everybody together. So, like if I am a person like I have been described as a raging extrovert by a person I had met an hour before, like if that is in my wheelhouse at the moment and like, if I've got the brain space to be creating these experiences or to be creating these get-togethers or the parties, it is like, okay, I have decided, at least recently, I'm going to try to create it. I'm going to try to be one of the people who can create those opportunities of connection.
And I think those intentional choices you make, or like the intentional choice Zach made, um, that personal intentionality, but we can also be intentional about the planning of our cities, right? So
Mhm.
Zach was able to walk to a park and have a public space where kids could play, and there was a barbecue pit, right? Like that was an intentionality about a public space that made it easier to do that. And so I think that's the other part of this, right? So Matt, to your worry about if we DoorDash our cities will create these sort of hellscapes. I think where my thinking goes is if we're intentional about how we plan and design our cities, then we're creating places where it is the easiest thing to do is to go out and interact and be social. And that is within our capacity to do, and it's something we've done before, and it's something we could do again. Uh, um, and um, and then we can all go to more parties, I guess.
But I'm only hosting two.
I want to be invited even if I don't come.
I just have mini parties every day at the coffee shop.
That's basically like that is a little bit of the argument, right? And that was even some of the um research that was referenced is that, those tiny interactions are healthier for us. You flex the social aspect muscle every time you have one of those tiny interactions. And so we are somewhat less healthy if we have removed those, or if you're only getting them from, like certain places. What, Tess? You just had a face.
If someone starts talking to me on the bus, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die.
I made a friend on the tube in London. It is
Oh
like
my God.
breaking so many London, UK, British societal norms. I started talking to a stranger.
I
All right.
do
Well,
debate whether
okay.
or not
You
I
would,
wear an earbud, like in public places, because it sends a very standoffish vibe. But sometimes I'm like, yeah, like I get it.
okay. Well, it sounds like you and Zach are putting in the effort for the rest of us, and I'm encouraged by that. So maybe that's where we can leave it.
Thanks. We can. I think it's a very worthwhile conversation, and I'm glad that we had it.
But Zach fixed it. Zach had the barbecue.
That's
He
true.
It's the most
did.
Zach is
important
like
role of
the
all.
the quiet force that just swoops in and like ties it up with a nice bow.
That's perfect. It's like blah blah blah. Go to the park, have a barbecue, get some flamingos. Job done.
I'm absolutely stealing that idea. I
It
love it
was
so
interesting
much.
though, Zach, that you sort of characterized the idea that the fact that you're like, I decided to go to the park, like it was a revolutionary idea, right? Like, I guess that's part of my point is like you had to like really like steel up the idea, like I'm gonna go to the park, which is like kind of weird, like
But
just to go to the park.
also, like, were you the one who said, let's be friends to the other guy?
I don't remember exactly.
It's a big step, is my point. Whoever
It is.
says, let's formalize this,
Hmm. Well, it
it's,
wouldn't have happened without the grill because, like, it probably would not have because you don't say like, "Hey, stranger, come into my home, let's hang
oh,
out."
right.
Mm.
Right? There has to be
Wow,
another.
that
Front
park,
porches.
that humble park grill did so much work. And
I'm so glad
now
we didn't
there's
stop
like a
recording.
oh man. I'm leaving inspired by Zach's park story. I feel like that's the secret sauce.
Yay, Zach, you fixed it.